So we are thrilled to sit down today with Curtis and Irene Hill. I met them on a sailing trip in the Bahamas in 2024, and in hanging out with them, and I'll tell more about how we've hung out since then. But they just shared an amazing, beautiful journey with us. How they went from working in the aviation industry to partnering in business together, getting into the software education business, and just really going through a transformation that we felt was illuminating for us and inspiring for us. And so we wanted to circle back and revisit that conversation and share it with you. Welcome to the What Could Go Right podcast. We are your hosts, Erik, Orton.
And I'm Emily Orton.
And here we talk about personal growth and sailing. In 2014, we moved aboard a fixer-upper sailboat and bootstrapped a year sailing with our 5 kids, and it changed our lives forever.
We tell the whole story in our memoir, our book, 7 at Sea. On this podcast, we want to help you go from fear to freedom, one adventure at a time. So welcome to the What Could Go Right podcast. We're so happy to have you, Irene and Curtis.
Thank you.
Great to be.
So refresh my memory. We went sailing in the Bahamas, I believe it was August of 2024.
That's correct.
Is that right?
It was amazing.
It was great. Really fun.
I remember because, well, first of all, we went with our friend Jana, who's a watercolor instructor, and we all watercolor painted, and that was delightful. And I remember especially because I don't usually do trips in the Bahamas during hurricane season, but that's when Jana could go. So we went and we got to watch the most amazing lightning storm off the back of the boat. And I remember you were so on point with the weather. And I just thought, like, what is this guy looking at? And I didn't know then that you were a pilot and that you have all the cool apps and you're used to looking at weather before you go someplace. And so we're going to talk about your career.
Yeah, maybe I just add to that. I look at weather when I'm not going someplace. I just really find it very interesting what weather is doing. And so it was really fun to have that and sort of see those storms, which way they were moving. And, you know, and really to your point, we felt very safe. That's the first time we've been sailing. We felt very safe. We knew where the storms were. They were in a distance and they were moving a different direction. So I wasn't worried at all. We could really just sit down and relax and watch, to your point, the most cool lightning storm we've seen. It was very fun.
And it's just coming back to me. Didn't we also watch a SpaceX launch?
No, did we? I don't remember that. Because we just saw
No, you would have remembered.
in California, and it was the first one we'd seen.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing that.
No, because I saw one in
Sea of Cortez.
In the Sea of Cortez, and then I saw another one in the Bahamas. And I could have sworn it was during that trip, but maybe I'm
those are fun. We've never seen one, but we were just in Anaheim. We saw one there, so it was not long after the launch off the California coast. It was incredible, right at sunset. So the sun was down, but the sun was catching that spacecraft. It was beautiful. So it was a cool thing.
Okay, well, you've seen it, so you know they're fantastic. So. And so first of all, we had a wonderful time sailing, and it was delightful just to be with both of you. And then I remember, Curtis, you said, hey, you know, if you ever want to fly down to the Grand Canyon for lunch, let me know. And, you know, we both live in Utah and we live pretty close to each other. And Irene, I remember you said, Erik, please take him up on this. He loves to do this. And so, you know, we got home and it took a few months before we circled around, but then I was like, hey, you know, Curtis, remember you offered that thing that sounded really pretty cool. And then, so, you know, I think was it around Christmas time or right before Christmas?
Our daughter was flying in for Christmas that day. And we were like, someone else is going to pick you up.
Yeah, we're going to be out with our friend Curtis. So it was like mid to late December, and you took me and Emily in your plane, and we flew from Spanish Fork, Utah, down to the Grand Canyon, and we had lunch, and then you flew us back, and it was just this magical, marvelous day. And the flying was beautiful. The scenery was beautiful. Lunch was fantastic.
Company was great.
And the company was great. And we just, on that flight, we had this conversation about your journey from working in the aviation industry to what you segued into later on. And so I just want to spend some time revisiting that with the benefit of Irene there to you know, corroborate and make sure you're, you know.
I remember it right.
keep each other on task. But the reason that we feel like this story is so great is because you really took a risk. Like, you increased your risk tolerance. You went from something that was very known into something that was very unknown. And that's where I feel like just about anybody, regardless of what their job or their career plans or, you know, their hopes and dreams, can relate to that experience of feeling like I'm inside a comfort zone. I maybe am familiar with this, but don't want to stay here forever. I'm looking for something better, but it's really scary to leave what's familiar. And anyway, so that, just as an archetype, just as an adventure story, really, I think can speak to anybody. And the more specific, we've heard this in storytelling, we found it to be true. Like, the more specific you are, the more universal the story becomes. So we love to hear your story. And as people who work together in business, that also like piques my interest in the dynamic there.
Well,
so where would you like to begin? You can take it from wherever you want. We mostly just want to listen,
okay,
but
so
we may jump in.
Let's talk about aviation. There's something that pilots get. There's some kind of bug that most pilots experience, and it is just really a love for being up in the air and seeing the earth from where you can see it when you fly. And that bug came to me when I was about 5 years old, literally the first time I was on an airliner, and I still remember it. I'm now in my late 60s. I still remember that flight, and it was just a flight from San Francisco to Salt Lake, and you know, I was hooked. And from there on, I declared to my parents, I want to be an airline pilot, and so they knew that all along. And you know, I still was playing with Tinker Toys, but I was building airplanes with them, and it was just something that really became a great interest to me. So I started to learn to fly right out of high school. I was already aware that I had a big obstacle, and that is that my vision was not going to get a first-class medical for me, which is required for airline pilots. And I learned that in junior high school. It was devastating but I pressed ahead, and you know, fortunately, in my high school, there was an industrial arts teacher who was a pilot, and he persuaded the school district to let him teach ground school, aviation ground school, as part of the curriculum. And so as a senior in high school, instead of doing woodshop, I was doing FAA ground school, and I passed the written test before I graduated. And right after graduation, I started flying, and I soloed that first summer. I was 17 years old, and the next summer I had my pilot's license. So that was the beginning. And I flew quite a bit after college when I was just a single guy. Enjoyed it. I was working in general aviation and actually repoing airplanes for the finance division of Cessna Aircraft, and had a lot of fun doing it. But I decided to go back to grad school, get my business degree and a master's degree in business. And that's where I met my sweetheart. She was also in MBA school, so we both were getting our master's in business. I was hired out of MBA school by Northwest Orient Airlines, and that as a management employee. I wasn't going to be able to fly. I didn't have a first-class medical, but I still loved the industry. And so I said, yeah, I want to be just part of the operation. And they had a training program at the airline. And so I went from MBA school, you know, graduating with a bunch of professionals going into private equity and banking and whatever. I went from there to the ramp at Minneapolis St. Paul International and was loading airplanes. And I was the only MBA out there, I'm pretty sure. But that was a training program for operations managers. It was really cool that they had that program. I worked on the ramp for 6 months and totally learned the ramp operation. Then I went to reservations and was a reservation agent for 6 months and learned that. And then I went to the airport as a customer service agent and worked the ticket counter and the gates. And after 18 months, I was ready to go into management, and they transferred me to Philadelphia International, and I was there as a manager of the operation, assistant manager. There was a station manager there already. But to shorten this up, so I spent a few years in different operations roles. At some point, I was out in Reno as the station manager for Northwest Airlines. They closed the station, and I had a decision to make career-wise, and decided to move to headquarters. I went to headquarters, and now I started using the MBA degree, and so I went into finance, and I was a controller for all the domestic airports, controller meaning the financial guy who was watching budgets and so forth. And I did some different roles there at headquarters, always learning a lot, and in different departments, technical operations. I was ultimately in the cargo department, cargo division, as the director of cargo operations. It was cool. I loved it. Director of cargo operations, we had 747 freighters at the airline. They were flying to Asia, hubbing in Anchorage. They'd send a whole bunch of freighters up from the States in Anchorage. They'd switch all the cargo around and then fly to all the stations in Asia. I still remember the day I was able to be up there and needed to come back, and climbed into this cockpit of 747 and sat right behind the captain for a flight from Anchorage to Chicago. And it was just speaking to my heart, although I realized that I was not sitting in the captain's seat. I was sitting behind the captain, and that was as far as I was ever going to get into as far as flying airliners.
And let me just interject here. I didn't know him when he flew. So we met, we got married. He went straight to Minneapolis to work, and I had not seen this part of him, but it became very clear as he was working that even being around pilots was just tearing at his heart. It was hard. And I came to understand how much it meant to him, to his desire to fly, and the fact that he couldn't, and that he was passing and he was interacting all day when he was working at the airports with pilots. And it was hard for me to see how painful that was for him. And there were times when when he'd get frustrated with the job he had at the time, and I just say, why don't you try now? Why don't you follow that dream? Because it got to the point where they were allowing what was different from when he would have been applying to be a pilot. They got to the point where they would allow them to have glasses to 20/20.
Yeah.
Whereas originally they just had to have 20/20 vision.
Yeah, it was the hiring decision. You can actually have a first class medical and have your eyes corrected. You see pilots all the time in the airports and they are wearing glasses, but that was tough. It was tough.
Yeah, and he just said, I'm way too far behind. I don't have the hours. And now I have this family. I don't want to leave my family every day. And
I wasn't flying at all then.
So
when I got married,
never flown with him.
Got married, and we one by one had 6 children. By the time you have a wife and 6 kids, and you're just a salaried guy at the airline, you can't have your plane and fly it. You just can't do that. So for years and years and years, I did not fly, but I did work the airport operation and enjoyed that a lot. Where we were in Minnesota, actually, I was interacting with a lot of pilots in our church community, and they were all members of the church, and we'd interact as friends, and they would go off on their trips and fly the big ones, including the 747. And I would just be on the ground doing the operation. And to that point, going home every night to my wife and 6 kids. And so I say that because the silver lining in this, and there is more as we go on with the story, you'll see that it worked out beautifully. And although I had those disappointments, things work out. And I guess one of the main things I've learned is you can't always see what's ahead. You can't see what's ahead, and yet some great things can be ahead. And in our case, they were. And so the difficult thing then was, as I was the director of cargo operations at Northwest Airlines along about 2001, revenue started to fall. They were worried about the cost structure, and they did a layoff in the cargo division, and about 20 of us were laid off. And the way that happened is important to the story, because I was involved. I was involved in the operation. I wasn't really seeing the financial side of the business. And one morning I went to work on a Monday morning, and they sat me down and announced that I'm done. I don't have a job anymore, and thank you very much. By 10:30 in the morning, I was home explaining to my wife that my career of 16 years at Northwest Airlines was over. It was totally unexpected. When I went home on Friday, I had no idea this was coming. I had a wife and 6 children and a mortgage. I was also the bishop of our congregation, so I was also involved in the church community in a big way. I was just involved in so many things, except Monday morning at 10:30, I didn't have a job anymore. And my career was essentially ended. And I never expected that. I totally expected just work my whole career at the airline because I really did enjoy it. So silver lining in that, this was April of 2001. And so I started, I worked with a recruiter trying to get some employment in the airline business, and it wasn't happening. 5 months later was 9/11/2001. And that was devastating to the airline industry. And for me to be unemployed, wanting to get into the airline business, it just wasn't going to happen. And so very frustrating. And again, I still had the wife and 6 kids and the mortgage, but month after month was going by.
They stick around.
I just didn't have the job. Now, the fortunate thing about that, again, as I look back, what are the silver linings? Actually, probably that I got laid off in April instead of in October after 9/11, when the airline revenues were just plummeting. Because in April, they gave me a pretty nice severance. I was paid 2 weeks of a salary for every year I had worked. So they gave me 32 weeks of pay, which was really important for this, this interim period. Plus, I pulled my pension benefits out as well. The airline business was notoriously underfunded in their pensions. And I pulled all that out and invested it elsewhere. And then 9/11 hit. And I was grateful that I was situated the way I was. Ultimately, I got a job. A recruiter called me and said, there's a job out in California at a small general aviation company. And they need a general manager, and would you be interested? And at first I said, no, I don't want to do that. I was still thinking airlines.
But he came down and told me he'd gotten the call and told me what he'd said. And
down
I was
the stairs, yeah.
Well, don't you think, I said, where was it? Because we had a discussion about if we were going to leave and go anywhere, if we could go anywhere, where would we think to go? And we decided on Sacramento, California, because it's kind of, my family was in Utah, his was in San Jose.
Yeah.
And we loved that area. We'd driven through it many times. And I said, so where was this job he was talking about? And he said, the Sacramento area. Mm. And I was like,
yeah.
Don't you think you should talk to them? And not to mention, it was like 2 weeks before Christmas, and we were taking charity at this point. I was like,
yeah, it was
we
tight.
need a job.
We need a job.
So he went back and talked to him, and we got this job.
Let me just interject here, though. Again, part of this story has to do with looking back and figuring out what you can learn by what had already happened. And what it meant to me when I came home on a Monday morning and said I just lost not only my job but my career, I started thinking, I need to be involved in something where I have a little more control and can see a little more about what's going on in the business or with my employer's business, so that I'm not blindsided like I was. And nothing against the airline. I really did enjoy it there, and I enjoyed the people, but just the way it happened was, I was totally beholden. I didn't have any control over what was going on. And not only that, I didn't have any way to prepare for what was about to happen. So then I thought, as I go forward, I want to be involved in a business where I have some visibility to what's going on. And so when it came time to think about this job in California, again, small company, title was general manager. I thought, okay, that's kind of a job where I would see what's going on. And I would have the visibility that I really wanted. So ultimately we accepted and we moved to California. And this was 10 months after I had lost the job at the airline. And so we were glad to be employed. She was especially glad I was employed. And so we made that move. This was a small company, and it was not making money. Aviation is a tough business. It really is a tough business. There's a little side joke that people make in the aviation business. If you want to make a small fortune in aviation, just start with a large one. And that's so that's kind of what we were facing there. I mean, some aviation companies do fine, and some of the airlines do fine, but it is tough. And you can see even in the airline business, some airlines don't make it. And because it is tough, it's very complex business. It's very capital intensive. and a lot of operating expense in order to make $1. And so that's what we were facing. But the reason I bring all that up is I now went to a small aviation company where I had a lot of control over what was happening and a lot of visibility to what was happening. And I began to learn some lessons there about how to run a small business that's having cash flow problems, that's needing a relationship with bankers, that has just some challenges that I never saw in my airline career, because my specialty was operations stuff and departmental finance, not cash flowing the company and all of those kinds of things. I just never had any experience with that. So as I look back and I'm learning lessons, I can see the change that I made from the airline to that small aviation company as a temporary learning experience. And all through this, as I look back, I will say this: my faith says, attribute these to the hands of the Lord. That heaven was looking out for me and guiding me. It's almost like the Lord said to me, "Okay, you've lost your loved career, but let me show you another way. I'm going to show you something." And part of that was, you're going to go to California, and it's not going to be a super successful company, but you're going to learn a whole bunch of things you need to know for the next step that's coming. And that's what happened, literally. I mean,
well, then tell him about the people you were working with that were buying airplanes, which was his dream.
Yeah,
his dream was to buy an airplane, and here he is.
This company in California was a Beechcraft dealership, and Beechcraft makes these, if you know airplanes, the King Air is a twin turboprop airplane. The Bonanza and the Baron are very popular, single and twin engine private planes. We were also managing flight operations for some of the clients who owned private jets, and so on the other side of the desk at Woodland Aviation, where I worked, it always seemed to be software guys. They were buying planes. They were just doing great in the software business. They were coming from Silicon Valley, which of course was only 60 or 80 miles away. And they were buying airplanes, and I just thought, I'm on the wrong side of this desk. I'm involved in the transactions that these guys are doing, but they have the resources to follow their dreams, and I don't. And so I learned that. And in the meantime, I'm also learning how to manage tight cash flow, how to manage banking relationships, creditors, and so forth. Really important lessons for what was coming, and I didn't really know what was coming.
Well, in the meantime, Woodland Aviation kind of they were needing to be purchased.
Yeah.
Somebody bought them, and that person had a business that he was running, just starting in the Bay Area. So it turned out that Curtis at this time, who was heavily involved in a church assignment with family kids that were going every which way, he was commuting to the Bay Area. This guy offered him a job in San Francisco, and it was a 2-hour commute both ways. Each way. So
right into downtown San Francisco. And so that was an interesting, fun thing, but it wasn't going to last for very long. And this guy was...
And you're flying or driving this commute?
He was driving.
Yeah.
And
I was
boating.
driving some of it. I would drive down to, if you know the Bay Area, Vallejo, and I would get on the ferry that would take me across the North Bay and into the Market Street in San Francisco. It took a long time.
Okay.
And, so that was frustrating.
Yeah.
The guy that bought was a software guy, and he was wanting to start a charter service. I don't know if it's called Exojet.
Anyway,
I don't know if I should use his name, but he was also getting into the aviation business, and he wanted our certificate for charter service, which Woodland Aviation had. So he bought the company, and so I had to move over to that. And then I'm in this long commute, and the importance of that is that it started to nudge me toward make a change. In the meantime, why don't you tell the story of what your sister was doing?
Yeah, so I have a sister whom I love, and I had called her one day. Her son actually was in like the top 32 of American Idol, and he was going to be performing that night in front of the nation. And I just called her and I said, we're thinking about John and just so excited for him. And we had a discussion about that. And then she said, Irene, is it okay if I decide not to change the world and just become a real estate agent? And I was like, sure. She said, I said, are you working to be a real estate agent? She said, yes, I've been taking the course on the side, and I'm just giving up everything else that I'd been planning. I said, how are you going to change the world? What were you doing? And she had been involved with a software company. She was not even at that time, had not even graduated from college. But somebody had invited her to come and be a part of his office team to pull together a team of people to develop some software for teaching English. For teaching reading. And so she'd done that years before. Then that things changed there. She quit. She went back to school, got her degree in English, and then just didn't know what to do next. And she said all these people from her former job had been coming to her saying, Sue, that was so fun. Let's do it again. We want to do this again. Why don't you start a business? Let's do it again. And so she had been working with 2 different groups that wanted to do this. And so she had been trying to get funding, and she'd gone all over to try to get funding. She'd been in Boston. She'd been talking to friends, and just could not raise any money. And this had been going on for a couple of years, and I didn't even know it. I didn't know she was doing this. And so I said, well, how much money do you need? And she gave me an amount, and I thought, I just naively said, well, that doesn't seem like that much. She said, yeah, I know, but I can't raise it. So I said, well, okay. I said, I don't know what I said. I make some comment about maybe we have a friend that could help or something, So that night, Curtis and I went on a walk. We lived on a country road, and it was probably a mile long. And we would walk down to the end of the country road and back. And I told him about my sister's dream that she had to start this business, or that she was trying to work on, but she needed a certain amount of money. And I told him, and at some point, and I said, I wonder about this friend, if he might be involved. And Curtis said, well, what about us? And I was like, what about us? I don't know. Do we have that much money? And he said, yes. And it turned out that he had pursued the idea of buying a business in Minnesota before we left.
It's true.
And he had put together this amount of capital to use to buy this business. And then he just invested it when we left and went to California.
This was back to the point about, I need something where I have more control and more visibility. And so I had toyed with the idea of buying a business, even in Minnesota, but that didn't work out. But also that included the process in my brain. My brain was changing now to get involved in something where you have control, and what kind of capital resources do we really have? And all that had sort of already happened in my mind to this point.
Yeah. So by the time we got back, he said, this might be exactly what we want to do. At this point, it was looking like we were either going to have to quit the job that he had, and then really there was nothing else in the area where we were that was obvious, or we were going to have to move to the Bay Area, which I didn't want to do that with my family. So I was motivated. So when he said
Bay Area, meaning probably the peninsula just south of San Francisco, it was not a place you take 6 children and who all are in school and everything. It just wasn't ideal for us.
So he said, what if we put up the money? And so we went home, we prayed about it. It felt good. I mean, it felt like, why not? And again, we were kind of in a position of, our options weren't great. And so this seemed like maybe something, because I knew these people. I knew one of them was another sister-in-law. I knew people that had been involved in the previous company. And I thought, they've done this before. They've been successful at building a product that they then sold to a big publishing company. I think they can do this. I think they can pull this off. So anyway, the next day I called my sister and I said, what if we could invest that much money? And she said, no. Oh, no. I would not let you do that. And I said, well, what if we want to? What if we want to take this risk? And, so that began a long dialogue back and forth, and us pursuing it, thinking about it, and looking into it more, and could we get these funds together. And then at some point she called a meeting at her house of all the people that wanted to do this. There were probably 11 of us there. She was taking an entrepreneur class at the time at BYU and invited that professor to come as well. And I remember at some point he said, when you've used all the money that you've raised, because she knew we knew that we could probably double what we were giving in other ways. When you've exhausted all that money and you're now selling your children and your farm and your everything else that you can gain money by,
let me just interrupt. We don't do
it
that.
Wasn't children.
Our children are fine.
It just felt that way. Anyway, so that was a little sobering, because I was like, oh wait, you mean this isn't all the money we're going to need? And I was naive enough to think that we could get started on this amount and then have a product to sell, and that was far from true. But it was enough to get us started. And we were sitting around this room, my sister's living room, and I just looked around and I heard all the people. They all said, gave their thoughts about what kind of company it might be. I mean, they didn't even know yet what their product was going to be. They just knew they wanted to do a business of some kind in educational software. And as I heard each one of them and looked around the room and was so impressed by who was there, the young and excited. And I was like, I totally will buy into this. I like these people. I think these people can do this.
Yeah. And so maybe just to your point, Emily, as far as what this change in the risk, the ability to take risk, how did that happen? Well, let me talk about that process just a little bit, because it was a process that we went through in our minds. One of the things we thought about is, what if this doesn't work and we lose this amount of money that we're about to put in, which essentially was everything. And that, as I look back, I said, how wise was that, or unwise was that? And we were naive perhaps. But we were thinking, I was thinking, this team, these people that were around the table at her sister's home, they didn't have a lot of capital. They were people that wanted to work for this new company because they'd all worked together before in the prior company. We knew that they knew how to build software, education software that would be acceptable in the market and even attractive in the market. And I thought, if we run out of money as a company, at least we're going to have a product that they've built, and we will be able to recover some of this investment. And now that was an assumption. I didn't know that for sure, but I just assumed, if we're building software and we've got this, and then we just run out of what I used to call runway, and I talked about that with the company a lot, because I ultimately became the chief financial officer, and I talk about runway. I talk a lot about airplanes all the time. They used to laugh at me because I was talking airplanes all the time, but we were talking about runway. If we run out of runway before we get this thing off the ground, at least we will have a product that we could probably sell in the marketplace to a strategic buyer. And that meant we wouldn't lose everything. So that was helpful. And then I looked at Irene, who, by the way, when I had proposed to her in MBA school, I was a year ahead of her. So when I graduated and went to the airline, she was only halfway through. So I proposed with a diamond and transfer papers to the University of Minnesota, and she agreed to come with me. We got married that same summer, and she came to Minnesota and finished her MBA degree at the University of Minnesota. So we were sitting on 2 master's degree in business. I just saw, and we were in our mid 40s by then. It was like, if this fails, we certainly can go back into the workforce, and 2 of us together would be able to work this out so that we could recover. That was the thinking. And that helped us sort of get the courage to take the risk. Again, others might still question that and say, well, shoot, that was a big risk. And as I look back, I say it was a big risk.
And thankfully we didn't.
It was.
Yeah, it is. And no risk and reward.
It's true. It was a big risk. And we did, again, those investors sitting around, or those people sitting around in that original meeting, some of them were just going to be employees. They didn't have money to invest, and some of them had a little bit to invest. But Irene and I were sort of the key first investors. We put a big 6-figure number on the table, and we knew we were sort of jumping off the cliff. Here we go. I stayed in California for a while after we agreed to do this investment. I was still working at the other company, so I had some income. That meant I began working as essentially the chief financial officer role in the software company without being paid. I was not being paid. They didn't have any money to pay me. I didn't want to invest the money and just pay it back to myself. So I was doing the books. I was doing the financial stuff at home at night for, how long did I do that? 1.5 years. It wasn't very hard, because in a new startup like that, all you do is look at the bank balance and watch it go down. You preside over the decrease. That's what you do. And so you figure out how to report that. Well, this is what's happening, and this is where we're spending the money. But there's zero on the revenue line, and there's really nothing as far as further investment to do. It's just, that's what you do. And so I did that without pay. And finally, it got to the point where we were actually getting some traction with the new company, and it was pretty clear that I was going to need to move. And so I sat down with Sue and some others and said, it's time for me to come to Utah and join the company on the payroll. And so that's what we did. And it was 1.5 years in. So, again, startup story includes people that are really sacrificing some things. And the story at Imagine Learning, that was the company's name. We had some employees who just really were passionate about the product we were building, which, by the way, ultimately we decided to build a product that would teach English to elementary age kids, starting with kindergarten, teach English as a second language. And the statistic I remember at the time, and this was the early 2000s, 5 million children in the United States were coming to public school having spoken some different language at home. And that's a really daunting thing for a child to do. Terrifying for some of them.
And a big problem to be solved, which is enter you guys.
Yeah. So that said, there was also a market there. The schools had to figure out what to do. I remember somebody was telling the story about in Salt Lake City. Salt Lake had at the time 100 different languages represented in their school district. Kids who were coming from homes because of immigration and so forth. There were just, and you just think about this 4th grade teacher who already has 28, 30 people in the classroom, and the principal shows up the door with a young child, just in from Somalia, and they are here in the public school, and he's now in your classroom. Doesn't speak any English.
Good luck.
Good luck. And so really tough. But that meant there was market opportunity, right? Because what we were doing was building software that essentially allows a child to sit down in front of a computer screen, and the software would begin to teach English. The little kid has a headset on, and he's in the back of the classroom, not disturbing anybody else, while the teacher's dealing with 28 other kids who speak English. And that child can then begin to learn. And we had about 15 language support. What that means is we had to make some decisions on the software as far as the primary language, allowing the child to hear their primary language first, and then sort of be weaned off of the primary language and begin having more and more English. And that's what the software did. We couldn't do that for every language. It was way too expensive to, get all the translations and stuff for a relatively rare language. But the 15 biggest, we had, they'd start, for example, in Spanish. The kid would be trained and taught how to use the computer using Spanish and all that. And then slowly the English would begin. And that helped them really make their way into the classroom. And we had such amazing stories ultimately that came out of that from kids. I remember one in New York. We actually did a video for the company. I'm talking a lot about our product right now, not our journey, but it was just exciting to see what was happening. We had this one educator, I think she was a principal in one of the New York City schools, and we made a video, and she was talking with this child next to her. She said, "We thought she was mute. She spoke a different language at home. She'd come to school and not say a word." And this principal, she was smiling and really kind of enthusiastic about this. She said, "We thought she was mute. She didn't speak for 2 years. She went through 2 years.
2 years?
And it may have been 1.5 years. It may have been in the second year. They put her on Imagine Learn. They put her on the headsets. She started to hear her own language. She started to learn the English. And then they turned the mic over to this little girl, and she was jabbering away in English. She was so excited. And again, the administrator turns and goes, "We thought she was mute. She never spoke a word until she had the confidence that came from using the software that taught her how to speak English." And then, of course, once you get it started, especially in the United States, they're on the playground, they're hearing English, they're immersed in the English. So it comes pretty fast for these kids, but they have to have the courage and the confidence to start. And that was what this market was that we ultimately tapped into at a big risk with our investment dollars. But it was work, and we knew there was opportunity there. We just didn't know whether we were going to be able to tap it fast enough.
Well, yeah, that's the reality. Is it took a lot longer to make it happen than we planned.
It did.
We did do a second mortgage. Our first house in California hadn't sold for 10 months.
Yeah, I know.
We bought a house here. It was a nightmare. We borrowed money from his dad. We literally were doing everything we could to get through those early years, but we made it.
But never with really
Despair.
Fear. I mean, we were worried, but maybe fear, but not terror.
Yeah.
Not terror, fear.
Fear, not terror.
And I think that's an important, distinguisher, because everybody will come to fear.
Yeah, and that's what taking risk involves. That I'll circle back and say, you have to assess. Well, what if this doesn't work? I mean, you want to have confidence, you want to have faith going forward, and be positive. But it's wise, in my opinion, and that's what we did, to step back and say, okay, what's the worst case here? What if it doesn't work? What will we do? Both of us go back to work. We'll make it through. We'll sell the product, whatever product we've already built. And with that, we had enough courage to go forward. It's just that you don't know what the journey is going to look like for the company. And it did take us about 4 years to get to cash positive, where we were generating more cash than we were spending. And that meant we had to have additional investors. And Irene's sister is terrific at that. She really is. Mm-hmm. Some entrepreneurs, your listeners may recognize this. Some entrepreneurs have enough skills, a skill set that would allow them individually to go out and start a company and build it and go for it. And it's happened many times. In our case, it took, in my opinion, 3 of us coming together with separate skill sets. Mine was clearly on the financial side. We had another guy who was clearly on the sales side. He was very good at sales. And he had also worked in the education technology industry before with Sue. And he was coming in. And then her sister Sue was terrific in the team building skill, finding and recruiting really good people and building a culture in the company that caused people to want to be there, and at times even to be willing to make sacrifices. So that a couple of times we weren't able to even make the payroll, and some of our employees just said, "That's okay, mine can wait. Just wait. When you have it, you can pay me, but I'm glad to wait." And that allowed us to keep going. So I've often thought about the fact that 3 of us coming together, all 3 of us were needed. And obviously the group was bigger, but sort of there were 3 key skill sets there that made up the whole that we needed. And I individually could not do that. And I don't think the others would have done the financial side ultimately, as far as managing the cash flow and how to deal with that. I mean, literally sometimes we had bills to pay at the company and we didn't have quite enough cash to pay it. And so, I had to decide, which do we pay first and how do we manage this so that we're fair to our vendors and so forth. But you know what? That was a skill I had learned at my job in California, the one I hadn't really planned on, but that fate, and I would say, no, the Lord guided us into that experience for 3 years so I could learn how to do this, because I had dealt with those problems in California.
So I know we're going long. The lowdown is we sold it after how many years?
Yeah, 10 years.
10 years. And it was successful. I think they were in every state but one in the union at the time they sold it.
Yeah.
Many of those programs were used during COVID. By then their curriculum had grown And in Texas, where we were during part of COVID, all the schools had used Imagine Learning for their kids during COVID. Really successful. And
ultimately, when we sold, we were nearly 500 employees. So
I had asked him before we started, I said, what is your goal? What's your dream for this company? And he said, in 10 years, I want to be able to buy my own airplane. And it happened.
Yes. Back to that.
Okay, can I help you? Can I help you land this plane, so to speak?
You want to co-pilot?
Well, because you talked about the risks that you were facing and wanting to be in more control, and oftentimes being more in control requires greater levels of risk because that's just how the world works. And you looked at the scenario and said, what could go wrong? And how, if it does go wrong, how do we recover? And I don't want to be too on the nose about this, but our podcast is called What Could Go Right? And what could go right was, and you identified it, you said in 10 years, we could sell this business, this company, and I could buy my own plane and have this dream come to fruition that you've had since you were 5.
I want to move 24 inches to the other side of this table.
Yes.
To be the software guy.
That is exactly what happened. Yes, I know. It gave me the motivation to say, let's take this risk, because I could see what was happening in other people's risk taking and so forth. And that's the way it happened. And it played out. It played out really well. I mean, there were times where it was difficult, but all in all, I mean, the culture at that company was terrific, and the people we were working with are terrific, and we had a great experience. We
loved it.
We had a great experience, and ultimately it was very successful. We finally did have private equity come in, and they made some big investments, and ultimately then we sold the company. And not only did I buy the airplane, but I bought it right out of the factory. It was brand new, and I just love it.
And I just have to say, it's a beautiful plane. It's a beautiful plane. And Emily and I got the chance to fly with you, as we talked about earlier. And we had done a couple of flying lessons on our own, just out of curiosity. I'm not an experienced pilot. I'm not on that trajectory. And I don't know that you are either. But we, there was a big difference between those kind of like one-off lessons.
The ones that we were taking lessons in.
And your plane. It's a really nice, comfortable 6-seater plane. And we had a beautiful day. And so for us, I guess it's just satisfying to get to step into your dream having happened. We met sailing, but then we got to step into the aviation world, and then to hear you tell stories about how you as a couple will fly around, and the main thing you like to do is fly around and visit your kids who are all over the country, and you can go together. And you were telling us stories about how you were helping your son move, and he had all the kids in the van, and you said, you know what, we're nearby. We'll land, we'll meet you. The kids can pile in with us. We'll fly them home. And Dad, your son or son-in-law,
it's our son,
could do the long haul with the truck, and just the kind of life that it opened up for you as parents and grandparents. And I just think it's such a beautiful, delightful story. And so, but it doesn't come, it's not easily won. You have to go through everything you just shared to get there, to go from, hey, I have a job, I've been laid off. We need to feed our kids. We need to keep a roof over our heads, to, let's just fly the kids home or the grandkids home. That's a journey.
Yeah. The other thing is I don't think it's easily planned. We could never have anticipated this. I mean that, and yet, as we look back, the Lord was preparing us. I mean, we had experiences of, let's buy this business, and we ran into all kinds of issues, but we had put together the resources to do that. And let's go to this small airline, and it's failing, but guess what, we're learning everything we need to learn for our next venture. We couldn't have planned it, and we were lucky that I had this sister, and we just kind of fell into it. But yet you recognize, no, we didn't fall into it. We were prepared along the way,
learning all the way
to
through.
have this new experience. And it wasn't as risky as it might have been. otherwise. We did have confidence in this team, and we did have, some things that were kind of foundational to make it happen. But it was fun.
Like your hearts were open to recognize the opportunity and stout enough to take the risk and be persistent in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's an incredible story. And we just want to thank you so much for sharing it with us.
And our listeners.
Yeah. And our listeners, because I think you really did hit on every aspect of a good adventure: the persistence, the uncertainty, the surprise reversals, the low points, and then this Disney ending, right? Where it's
I think it really is a story that hits on your theme, which is what could go right. Because I talked about we wanted to know what could go wrong and be prepared for that. But that's, in my mind, that's wise to think about and get some answers and put those over here on the shelf just in case. But in the meantime, what could go right is amazing, and it did go right. And we had amazing run, and the thing sold for 9 figures, I think. So it was really great. And what blessings that came because of the risk. You have to take the risk, and you just have to figure out how to manage the risk. But in the end, take it.
Oh,
so great.
That's the best ending possible. Thank you so much for joining us
Thanks
today.
for inviting us.
We end every thank you.
We loved having you.
And we end every episode just by putting this question out to everyone listening: what could go right? Hey everyone, before we sign off today, this is Erik, Orton, and I just want to give you the sailing update. A few weeks ago, we put out our schedule for the whole year, all of 2026. And I just wanted to highlight a couple of trips that are coming up that I think are really worth remembering. We are going to be spending the winter in the British Virgin Islands, the BVI. So we're going to do a trip early January, late January, and February. And I love the BVI, and I'm going to tell you why. It is easy to get to. The sailing is world-class. There's fantastic snorkeling. It's sunny at a time of year when, wherever you are in the world, January and February, chances are it's a little bit cold, a little bit gloomy. This is the perfect getaway for midwinter. So January 5th through the 10th, we're going to be in the BVI. We'll be there again January 26th through the 31st, and then again February 16th through the 21st. Another thing is, these will be our lowest price trips of the year. After these trips, prices jump to our new season setting. So if you want to get the best bang for your buck, BVI January 5 through 10, 26 through 31, or February 16 through 21. If you're feeling spendy, March, we are going to French Polynesia. We're going to do a one-way sail from Raiatea to Bora Bora. Bora Bora is gorgeous. The last time we were there was, I want to say, 2017. So we don't go very often. It's almost double the cost of our other trips. If you can afford it, it's super worth it. And it's beautiful. Imagine just like the biggest expanses of turquoise water and incredible sea life and fun restaurants and beautiful scenery. So if you want to go to French Polynesia in March, we're going to be there March 8th through the 14th. If not, if that's a little bit out of your range, which I totally get, our January and February trips to the BVI are going to be your best deal for the year. So click the button or just go to the Awesome Factory / the Awesome Factory / sorry, let me get this right. The Awesome Factory .nyc / sailing. That'll take you to the page that explains everything. Let's hop on a call, or you can email us at hello@theawesomefactory.nyc. Would love to sail with you in Q1 of next year. There's a couple of spots left on each of the BVI trips, so would love to welcome you aboard, and whether there or Bora Bora, either way, it'd be fun to sail together. Before we wrap up entirely, people go sailing with us, and I want you to hear from them directly what kind of experience they have. So here's a sailing takeaway from somebody who's gone sailing with us recently.
I was apprehensive about going somewhere by myself. First time ever being a solo traveler. And finding out in Zoom call there would be a couple others, where I would be like, oh, everyone kind of go in their spaces at night and I'd be by myself. But what I found out is that wasn't the case. But what I also loved is early in the mornings is you'd get up and someone would just be sitting on the deck by themselves, just enjoying the peacefulness of the morning or the evening. Something else that I didn't expect to do is to help others. Today, helping Glenda do something she's never done before, and that might be just my teacher nature, being there for her to support her. That was something I felt like I could give back to, since I don't know how to sail. Secondly is I enjoyed sailing 10 times as much as maybe even just being on the beach. It was a great experience. I would like spend all day just jib jabbing, whatever you guys call it. Jib jabbing. Tacking. I know it's tacking. Jib jabbing. And then
that's the TV, that's that movie.
Jib jab.
Didn't we do it last night? Didn't we have just the jib out and somebody said that? We jibed. Yes.
That was the jib jab.
Jib
Jib
jibe.
jibe. Yeah.
So what I would tell anybody is just book it and don't think about it ever. Don't think about it. Just book it and go. Book it and go.